On the outskirts of Millbrook Valley stands a forgotten farm, its weathered buildings telling silent stories of better days. Here, among overgrown fields and broken fences, a man named James Patterson finds his last chance at redemption. With calloused hands and an unwavering spirit, he works from sunrise to sunset, unaware that hidden cameras capture his every move. In her mansion across town, Sarah Montgomery watches her screens intently, fascinated by this mysterious stranger who pours his heart into her abandoned property. She spent years hiding her billions, searching for something genuine in a world of false smiles and empty promises. Now, watching this homeless man transform her land with nothing but determination and raw hope, she realizes she's found what money could never buy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rusted gate groaned beneath James's touch, decades of neglect evident in its weathered hinges. He stood at the entrance of what the faded mailbox identified as Montgomery Farm, his worn backpack containing everything he still owned in this world. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across untamed grass that whispered of forgotten harvests and abandoned dreams. 6 months on the streets had taught James to recognize opportunity in unexpected places. This wasn't just another abandoned property. It was a chance, the kind of chance that came wrapped in hard work and uncertainty, but a chance nonetheless. His fingers traced the gate's intricate ironwork, memories of his father's voice drifting through time. "Son, good land never dies. It just waits for someone who cares enough to bring it back to life." 20 years as a successful financial advisor hadn't prepared him for the market crash that took everything, but those early lessons of working the soil alongside his father had stayed with him. James pushed the gate open, wincing at its protest. The gravel driveway had long since surrendered to weeds, creating a green carpet that led to a sprawling farmhouse. Its white paint had aged to a weathered grey, windows dusty but unbroken. To the left stood a massive red barn, its paint faded but structure sound. Fields stretched beyond, bordered by ancient oaks that stood sentinel against time. He made his way to the barn first, years of instinct telling him to check the basics: shelter, water, potential. The barn doors were secured with a simple latch, no padlock. Inside, shafts of sunlight pierced through gaps in the roof, illuminating a treasure trove of abandoned equipment. A tractor sat in silent dignity, its green paint dulled, but its frame intact. Tools hung on the walls, their handles smooth with age. In one corner, a workbench held boxes of old manuals and farming guides. "Well," James spoke aloud, his voice startling a pair of nesting barn swallows, "at least I'm not starting completely from scratch." He set his backpack down on a relatively clean patch of floor and began a methodical inventory. The habit, ingrained from his corporate days, felt oddly comforting now. Each tool represented possibility. The shovels could turn earth, the rakes could clear debris, the old hand plow could prepare soil. His mind began calculating, planning, seeing past the decay to what could be. As evening approached, James cleared a small space in the barn's loft. The hay was old but still dry, and he'd slept on far worse in recent months. Through a gap in the boards, he could see the main house silhouetted against the darkening sky. Tomorrow, he would begin the real work. That night, lying on his makeshift bed, James listened to the symphony of crickets and distant owls. For the first time in months, sleep came easily, accompanied by dreams of green fields and fresh possibilities. Unknown to him, in a darkened study across town, Sarah Montgomery watched his arrival on her security feeds, her finger hovering over the button to call the police before slowly withdrawing. "Show me who you are," she whispered to the screen. "Show me what you'll do with a second chance." Word count, 900 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 3, which introduces Sarah's perspective and daily life in more detail? Sarah Montgomery's study resembled a command center more than a room in a private residence. 6 high-definition monitors lined one wall, each displaying different angles of her family's old farm. The technology stood in stark contrast to the old-world elegance of leather-bound books and antique furniture that filled the rest of the space. "Ms. Montgomery, the board is waiting for your decision on the tech fund investment." Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, but Sarah's attention remained fixed on the center screen, where James was methodically sorting through old tools in the barn. "Tell them I'll have an answer tomorrow, Caroline." She leaned forward, adjusting one of the cameras for a better view, "and cancel my dinner with the foundation board." 3 years ago, Sarah had installed the security system after vandals had broken into the farmhouse. Now those same cameras were providing an unexpected window into a story she couldn't stop watching. The farm had been her sanctuary once, before. The weight of her inheritance had pulled her into a world of boardrooms and charity galas. Her father's death had left her with billions in assets, a tech empire to manage, and a gnawing emptiness that no amount of philanthropy could fill. She turned to the granite-topped desk, where her financial advisor's latest report lay open. "Montgomery Farm, Asset Liquidation Analysis," read the header in stark black letters. Martin had been pushing her to sell the property for months, arguing that the maintenance costs were unnecessary given its disuse. "You haven't visited that place in years, Sarah," he'd said during their last meeting. "It's time to let go of the past and focus on expanding the Montgomery tech portfolio." But watching James work, seeing the care in his movements as he assessed each broken fence and overgrown field, stirred memories she'd thought long buried. Her father teaching her to drive the tractor, her mother's garden bursting with summer vegetables, the simple joy of dirt under her fingernails before shareholders and stock prices had consumed her world. A movement on one of the screens caught her attention. James had emerged from the barn, his figure backlit by the setting sun. He stood still, surveying the land with what seemed like reverence. Even through the digital interface, she could sense his determination. Sarah opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. One email to security would have him removed. Another to her lawyers would ensure the property was properly secured against future trespassers. Instead, she found herself opening a browser window and typing, "James Patterson, financial advisor." The search results painted a familiar picture. Former senior partner at a prestigious firm, stellar reputation. Then the market crash, followed by a rapid descent as he tried to protect his client's interests at the expense of his own stability. No criminal charges, just a man who'd chosen principle over self-preservation. "Well, Mr. Patterson," she murmured, closing the laptop, "let's see what you can do with my father's legacy." The intercom buzzed again. "Ms. Montgomery, the Bloomberg reporter is on line 1 for the interview about your Tech Innovation Prize." Sarah straightened her silk blouse, corporate mask sliding back into place. "Put him through, Caroline." She cast one last glance at the monitors, where James was carefully storing tools for the next day's work. 2 worlds, separated by wealth and circumstance, yet connected by a piece of land that held the keys to both their futures. Word count, 800 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 4, which will focus on James beginning his work on the farm and discovering the old seed box? Dawn painted the old barn in shades of amber as James began his second day at Montgomery Farm. He'd woken before sunrise, the old habits of his corporate life repurposed for a different kind of productivity. The morning air carried the promise of spring, tinged with the earthy scent of possibilities. His first target was the tool shed attached to the barn. Years of neglect had sealed the door shut, but persistent work with a crowbar finally granted him access. Inside, beneath layers of dust and cobwebs, lay the accumulated wisdom of generations of farmers. "Would you look at that?" James whispered, lifting a wooden box from a high shelf. Its lid bore elegant script, "Montgomery Heritage Seeds, 1952. Inside, carefully labeled packets told stories of crops long past. Cherokee purple tomatoes, blue Hubbard squash, Kentucky wonder beans. Each packet was sealed in wax paper, protected against time and moisture. He remembered his father's words about heirloom seeds. These aren't just plants, Jimmy. They're stories. Each variety carries the dreams of the farmers who saved them, season after season. The memory brought both comfort and pain. His father hadn't lived to see his sons fall from grace. Moving to the barn's main area, James retrieved the farming manuals he'd discovered the previous evening. Their pages were yellowed but legible, filled with handwritten notes in various scripts. 3 generations of Montgomery farmers had annotated these guides, marking successful planting dates, noting soil conditions, recording their triumphs and failures. The morning passed quickly as James alternated between studying the manuals and surveying the fields. The land had good bones, proper drainage, rich soil beneath the overgrowth, even the remnants of an irrigation system. He sketched rough plans in a notebook salvaged from his backpack, corporate strategy skills, finding new purpose in agricultural planning. Around noon, he walked into town, his first venture beyond the farm since arriving. Millbrook's main street was a study in small-town resilience. Family-owned shops mixed with modern conveniences, history, and progress in careful balance. The hardware store's bell chimed as he entered. Behind the counter, Tom Wilson looked up from his inventory sheets, eyes curious but not unwelcoming. "Haven't seen you around before," Tom said, setting aside his paperwork. "James Patterson." He extended his hand, conscious of the dirt under his nails. "I'm working on the Montgomery place." Tom's eyebrows rose. "That old farm's been sitting empty for years. Sarah Montgomery hasn't done anything with it since her father passed. I'm hoping to change that." James kept his tone carefully neutral, avoiding any mention of his unofficial residency. "Need some basic supplies to start. Seeds, primarily. For testing the soil." Tom studied him for a moment before nodding. "Got some decent varieties that do well in this climate. But you'll want to check the soil pH first. Got equipment for that too." As Tom gathered the supplies, James noticed the security camera above the counter, its red light blinking steadily. In her study across town, Sarah watched the interaction with intense interest, one hand absently touching the seed box's twin that sat on her desk, her own cherished connection to the farm's past. The rest of the afternoon saw James clearing a small test plot near the barn. Each swing of the scythe revealed more of the earth beneath, each cleared section bringing him closer to something that felt like purpose. The physical labor was demanding, but satisfying, so different from the abstract work of his previous life. As evening approached, he carefully planted test rows, using both the heritage seeds and the modern varieties from town. The old and the new, side by side, a bridge between past and future, just like the farm itself. Word count, 850 words would. You'd like me to continue with Chapter 5, which will focus on James's first major challenge with the broken tractor and the community's initial notice of his presence. The old John Deere tractor squatted in the barn like a sleeping giant, its faded green paint telling tales of countless harvests past. James circled it slowly, mental calculations clicking into place as he assessed the challenge before him. In his previous life, he'd analyzed market trends and investment risks. Now, he was calculating the odds of bringing this mechanical beast back to life. "All right, old girl," he muttered, patting the tractor's hood. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The maintenance manual he'd found offered hope. These models were known for their reliability and simple mechanics. But simple didn't mean easy, especially after years of neglect. 3 hours later, sweat dripped from his brow as he methodically worked through the engine's components. The battery was dead, obviously. Several hoses had deteriorated. But the engine block seemed solid, and there was no sign of serious rust in the critical components. A truck's rumble drew his attention. Through the barn's open doors, he saw a red pickup pulling up the drive. Tom from the hardware store stepped out, followed by an older man in well-worn overalls. "Brought someone who might be able to help," Tom called out. "This here's Frank Miller. Been fixing tractors in the valley longer than most folks have been." Alive, Frank approached the tractor with the reverence of a doctor examining a patient. "1962, John Deere 4010, he said, running his hand along the hood. "They don't make them like this anymore. Sarah Montgomery's father bought this new—" "I remember the day it arrived." James watched as Frank began his inspection, noting how the older man's hands moved with practiced certainty. "The hydraulics are shot," Frank declared after a few minutes. "And you'll need to rebuild the carburetor, but she's salvageable. I've got some parts back at my shop that might fit," Frank continued, eyes twinkling. "Never could bring myself to throw anything away. Drives my wife crazy, but sometimes hoarding pays off." That afternoon, a small crowd gathered as Frank supervised James's work on the tractor. Word had spread through town's invisible grapevine about activity at the Montgomery place. Curiosity brought them, but something else made them stay. The sight of careful work being done, of something abandoned being restored. "My grandfather used to work this land," one woman mentioned, introducing herself as Betty from the local diner. She'd brought sandwiches and lemonade, apparently deciding that men working deserved feeding. "Best sweet corn in 3 counties came from these fields." As the sun began to set, the tractor coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The small crowd cheered, the sound carrying across the fields. In her study, Sarah watched the scene unfold on her monitors, something tight in her chest loosening at the sight of life returning to her family's land. Later that evening, after the impromptu gathering had dispersed, James sat on the barn steps, studying his grease-stained hands. Frank had left him with a box of spare parts and an open invitation to stop by his shop. Betty had promised to bring more food the next day, insisting that he was too skinny by half. Tom had offered him credit at the hardware store, saying they could settle up once the first crop came in. It was more kindness than he'd encountered in months, freely given without knowledge of his past or judgment of his present circumstances. The simple acceptance felt foreign after so long living on society's margins, yet somehow more genuine than the corporate accolades of his previous life. Unknown to James, Sarah had made her own contribution to the day's success. A carefully anonymous delivery of new parts had arrived at Frank's shop that morning, exactly what was needed for the tractor's repair. She'd watched James work through her cameras, noting his methodical approach, his willingness to learn, his careful attention to detail. The same qualities that had once made him a successful financial advisor were now being applied to the resurrection of her family's legacy. The tractor's successful repair was more than just a mechanical victory. It was proof that broken things could be fixed, that what was lost could be found again, that second chances were possible. As night fell over the farm, 2 people in very different circumstances contemplated these truths, one in a restored barn, the other in a luxurious study, connected by a piece of land and its promise of redemption. Word count, 900 words would. You like me to continue with Chapter 6, which will delve into Sarah's background and the growing complexity of her secret observation. Sarah's fingers traced the headlines in the old newspaper clippings spread across her desk. Montgomery Tech CEO dies in private plane crash. Billion-dollar empire passes to reclusive daughter. Sarah Montgomery, Silicon Valley's mysterious heiress. The yellowing papers documented her transformation from a farmer's daughter to one of the wealthiest women in America. She'd found the box of clippings while searching for the farm's original deed. Instead, she'd discovered her father's carefully maintained archive, every milestone of Montgomery Tech's rise, from a small software company to a global giant, along with personal mementos from their life on the farm. Your grandfather thought I was crazy, her father's voice echoed from memory. Trading good farmland for computer parts. But he taught me something important. Whether you're growing corn or coding software, success comes from patience and attention to detail. A gentle knock interrupted her reverie. Caroline entered with the morning's financial reports. "The board is asking about the farm again, Ms. Montgomery. Mr. Phillips says the development company has increased their offer to $40 million. Sarah glanced at her monitors where James was marking out new planting areas with string and wooden stakes. His methodical approach reminded her of her father's careful planning. "Tell them I'm still considering my options." She picked up a photograph of her father, standing proudly beside their first computer server, housed in the farm's converted chicken coop. That makeshift server room had been the birthplace of Montgomery Tech. The industry press had crafted a different narrative. The brilliant programmer who'd struck silicon gold. They'd ignored the decades of farming wisdom that had shaped his business philosophy. "Technology moves fast," he told her, "but good growth takes time, just like on the farm." Now she watched as James applied that same patient wisdom to restoring her family's land. His corporate background showed in his organized approach, but there was something else there, a genuine reverence for the work itself. The local paper had picked up the story. A small article about activity at the Montgomery farm had appeared that morning, speculating about the mysterious worker bringing the property back to life. Sarah had already received calls from 3 real estate developers, eager to know if this signaled a change in the property's availability. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from the old photographs. "Money doesn't grow anything by itself, Sarah. It's just a tool, like any other. The real value comes from how you use it." She'd spent years hiding from her wealth, retreating behind corporate structures and anonymous donations. The farm had been her last connection to a simpler time before shareholders and board meetings had consumed her life. Now, watching James work through her cameras, she felt a growing urge to step beyond her role as unseen observer. Caroline's voice came through the intercom again. "Ms. Montgomery, the Bloomberg reporter is asking about rumors of a Montgomery Tech farming subsidiary. Apparently someone spotted equipment deliveries at the old farm." Sarah smiled, remembering the parts she'd arranged for the tractor. Her anonymous support of James's efforts hadn't gone unnoticed by the market analysts who tracked her every move. "No comment for now, Caroline." She picked up another photograph, her mother's garden in full bloom, the farmhouse gleaming white in the background. The same house that now stood weathered but proud, waiting for its chance at renewal. Somewhere between the corporate heiress and the farmer's daughter she'd once been, Sarah Montgomery was rediscovering parts of herself she'd thought lost forever. And through the simple magic of video feeds and careful observation, she was sharing a journey of restoration with a man who had no idea she existed, at least not as anything more than a name on an abandoned mailbox. Word count, 850 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 7, which will focus on the first signs of success in the farm's restoration and deepening community involvement? The first seedlings broke through the soil on a misty morning in early spring. James knelt in the test plot, morning dew soaking through his jeans as he examined the tiny green shoots. The heritage tomatoes from the Montgomery seed box had sprouted, first their leaves unfurling like tiny flags of victory. "Well, look who decided to join us," he murmured, gently touching one delicate stem. Around him, other rows showed similar signs of life, beans, squash and corn all reaching for the morning sun. The modern varieties from Tom's store were growing too, but there was something special about seeing seeds that had waited decades finally getting their chance to grow. Frank Miller's pickup truck rumbled up the drive, now a familiar sound of morning at the farm. He'd taken to stopping by on his way to his repair shop, bringing coffee and decades of agricultural wisdom. Today he carried something else, a rolled-up bundle of papers. "Found these in my attic," Frank said, spreading the papers on the hood of his truck. They were old agricultural surveys of the property, showing soil types and drainage patterns. Thought they might come in handy. Your test plot's in a good spot. That corner's always had the best soil on the property. James studied the maps with growing excitement. This changes everything. Look at these irrigation lines. If we can clear them out. Already talked to Pete down at the excavating company, Frank interrupted with a grin. He's willing to bring his equipment out this weekend. Says he owes the Montgomery family for help they gave his father back in '82. The community's support had grown steadily over the past weeks. Betty from the diner now had competition from other locals bringing food. The high school agriculture teacher had brought his class for what he called a practical restoration lesson. Even the town council had taken notice, discussing the potential impact of a revived Montgomery farm on local agriculture. James worked through the morning, clearing more land for planting. The tractor proved its worth, transforming what had once been back-breaking labor into steady progress. Each pass revealed more of the farm's bones, its underlying structure still sound after years of neglect. During a water break, he found himself talking to the seedlings, a habit that would have seemed crazy in his previous life. You just needed a chance, didn't you? Same as me. The words carried no embarrassment here. The plants were better listeners than any corporate board he'd ever presented to. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A van from the local nursery arrived, loaded with donated fruit tree saplings. For the old orchard space, the owner explained. Sarah Montgomery's mother used to make the best apple pies in the county. Seems right to bring that back. James accepted the gifts with growing humility. Each act of generosity, each shared story, wove him more tightly into the fabric of this community. It was so different from his years in finance, where relationships were measured in profit margins and market shares. As sunset painted the sky in shades of promise, James sat on the farmhouse's front steps, reviewing his journal of progress. The pages tracked more than just agricultural data. They recorded his own growth, his gradual transformation from a man seeking shelter to someone building a future. Unknown to him, Sarah watched this quiet moment through her cameras. Her own journal opened beside her monitors. In it, she'd tracked every donation she'd quietly arranged, every piece of equipment mysteriously delivered, every bit of help orchestrated from behind the scenes. But the real growth, the true restoration, had come from James himself. His dedication, his careful work, his willingness to learn and adapt. The tiny seedlings reaching for the sky were more than just plants. They were proof that with the right care and patience, new life could emerge from dormant dreams. Both James and Sarah, in their separate ways, were learning this lesson alongside. The growing crops, word count, 800 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 8, which will focus on the first major challenge to the farm's progress when a severe storm threatens everything James has built? The weather alert blared from James's salvaged radio, its harsh tone cutting through the peaceful morning routine. Severe storm warning for Millbrook Valley. High winds, possible hail, and flash flooding expected. All residents advised to take immediate precautions. James stood in the barn doorway, watching dark clouds mass on the horizon. The weather-beaten door creaked ominously in the rising wind, its hinges protesting each gust. Everything he'd accomplished over the past weeks lay exposed to nature's fury. Tender seedlings, newly tilled soil, young fruit trees just beginning to take root. In her study, Sarah's fingers hovered over her phone, tempted for the first. Time to break her anonymous silence. The radar showed a massive system heading straight for the farm. Her security cameras caught James's frantic activity as he began implementing what appeared to be a well-thought-out emergency plan. Ms. Montgomery. Caroline's voice interrupted her vigil. The storm's path puts several of our data centers at risk. The emergency team needs your authorization for route everything through the Western facilities, Sarah ordered, her eyes never leaving the monitors. And get me Pete from the excavating company, now. At the farm, James worked with desperate Efficiency. The old Montgomery farming manuals had included a section on storm preparation, clearly added after some long-ago disaster. He'd studied it out of habit, never expecting to need it so soon. Frank's truck skidded into the driveway, followed by several other vehicles. "Heard the warning," Frank called out, already moving to help. "Brought some hands and supplies." The next hour was a blur of activity. Tom from the hardware store arrived with sheets of plywood and plastic sheeting. Betty and other local women set up a command center in the barn, coordinating efforts and distributing supplies. The high school agriculture students showed up with their teacher forming a bucket brigade to fill sandbags. "The drainage ditches," James directed, pointing to the old agricultural surveys. "If we can clear them before the main storm hits." "Already on it," Pete replied, his excavator rumbling to life. "These are the same ditches my daddy helped dig. I know right where to find them." Thunder rolled overhead as they raced against time. James led the effort to construct temporary greenhouses over the most vulnerable crops, using Frank's expertise and materials donated by the community. The heritage seedlings, precious links to the farm's past, received special protection under carefully anchored plastic domes. The storm struck with biblical fury. Wind howled through the valley, testing every repair James had made to the barn. Rain fell in sheets, transforming the carefully tended soil into rivers of mud. Through it, all James and the volunteers fought to save what they'd helped build. In her study, Sarah watched in agonizing helplessness. Her cameras showed James working tirelessly, moving from one crisis to another. When the barn door threatened to tear loose, he was there with reinforcements. When water began pooling dangerously near the seedlings, he helped redirect it using the old drainage systems. The storm raged through the night. James stayed in the barn, monitoring the makeshift defenses and making repairs as needed. The volunteers took shifts, refusing to abandon the farm to nature's fury. Their headlights cut through the darkness, creating islands of determined activity in the tempest. As dawn broke, the storm began to recede. James stood in the barn doorway once again, surveying the aftermath. The farm was battered, but not beaten. Most of the seedlings had survived under their protective coverings. The drainage systems, once cleared, had performed their duty admirably. Even the old barn had held firm, protecting both equipment and people through the night. "Could have been worse," Frank observed, joining him with coffee from the volunteer station. "Much worse, if you hadn't been prepared." James nodded, exhaustion evident in every movement. "The Montgomery family knew what they were doing when they set this place up. Those drainage ditches saved us." "Speaking of Montgomerys," Frank said carefully, "Pete mentioned getting a call yesterday morning from someone asking him to be ready with his equipment, almost like they knew the storm was coming." In her study, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax, seeing the farm and its caretaker had survived. Her anonymous call to Pete had been a risk, but watching James lead the community in saving her family's legacy had confirmed everything she'd hoped about him. The storm had done more than test the farm's defenses. It had revealed the strength of community bonds, the wisdom of past generations, and the determination of a man who'd found his true calling among the fields and furrows of Montgomery Farm. Word count 900 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 9, which will focus on Sarah's first disguised visit to the farm and her direct interaction with James? Sarah stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Gone were the tailored suits and designer accessories that usually marked her as a Montgomery. Instead, she wore faded jeans, work boots found in the back of her closet, and a simple flannel shirt. Her carefully maintained hair was pulled back under a worn baseball cap. "Ms. Montgomery, the board meeting has been moved to—" Caroline stopped short, staring at her employer's transformation. "Cancel everything for today," Sarah said, picking up a pair of old work gloves. "Tell them I'm conducting a personal audit of rural investment opportunities." The drive to the farm felt surreal. For years, she'd only seen it through camera lenses and childhood memories. Now, watching the familiar landscape roll past her window, Sarah felt the weight of her dual identity more keenly than ever. She parked her mother's old truck, maintained but rarely used, at the end of the drive, out of sight of the security cameras she knew too well. The morning air carried the sweet scent of newly tilled earth and recent rain, stirring memories of countless childhood mornings spent following her father through these same fields. James was working in the restored vegetable garden, carefully staking tomato plants that had survived the storm. He looked up at her approach, shielding his eyes against the morning sun. "Can I help you?" His voice was warmer in person than it had sounded through the security feeds. "I heard you might need an extra pair of hands," Sarah said, using the slight drawl she'd worked years to eliminate from her speech. "Betty at the diner mentioned you could use help with the replanting." James studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a flat of seedlings. "Know anything about spacing tomato plants?" "My father taught me a thing or two." Sarah knelt beside him, letting muscle memory guide her hands in the familiar work. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. 18 inches apart, Sarah. Give them room to grow strong." They worked in comfortable silence, moving down the rows with steady purpose. Sarah found herself falling into the rhythm of the task, remembering skills she thought she'd forgotten. Her manicured nails disappeared under honest dirt, each smudge feeling like reconnection with her younger self. "You handle those plants like you've done this before," James observed, passing her another seedling. "Grew up on a farm," Sarah replied, the truth feeling strange in its partial telling. "But that was a lifetime ago. Funny how it comes back." "Do you, though, isn't it?" James smiled, gesturing at the surrounding fields. "All this, it's like the land remembers what it's supposed to be, just waiting for someone to remind it." Sarah looked around at her family's farm, seeing it now through both her camera's clinical views and this intimate ground-level perspective. The storm. Damage was more visible up close, but so was the care evident in every repair, every planted row, every cleaned-up corner. "The Montgomery family built something special here," she said carefully, testing the waters. "They did." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Been learning that more every day. The way this place is laid out, the soil management, the drainage system that saved us during the storm. There's generations of wisdom built into every acre." They worked through the morning, Sarah finding excuses to stay longer than she'd planned. James shared his vision for the farm's revival, each detail showing how deeply he'd studied her family's methods. She offered occasional suggestions, carefully framed as things she'd learned in her own farming days. As noon approached, Betty arrived with her usual food delivery, causing Sarah to make a hasty retreat. "I should go," she said, gathering her gloves. "Thank you for letting me help." "Thank you," James replied. "It's nice working with someone who understands what this place could be." Driving away, Sarah felt the divide between her worlds more sharply than ever. In her study, she could watch the farm's revival from a safe distance. But here, with dirt under her nails and the sun on her face, she'd remembered what it felt like to be part of something real. Back in her office, changing into her corporate armor, Sarah made a decision. She opened her laptop and began composing an email to her board of directors. The subject line read, "Montgomery Farm Agricultural Innovation Initiative. Word count, 850 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 10, which will focus on the first small harvest and its impact on both the community and our characters?" The first harvest basket sat on James's workbench like a painting come to life. Cherokee purple tomatoes nestled against vibrant green beans, their colors made more vivid by morning sunlight streaming through the barn windows. The heritage vegetables, grown from the Montgomery seed box, had produced fruits that looked nothing like their supermarket counterparts. They were irregular, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. "Those are your great-grandmother's tomatoes," Frank said, examining a particularly gnarled specimen. "Used to trade my mother 3 jars of honey just for a dozen of them." He didn't notice James's questioning look at the word "your." The Millbrook, Farmers Market had been running every Saturday for over 70 years. Today, for the first time in decades, Montgomery Farm would have a booth. James had hesitated about using the farm's name, but Frank had insisted. It's what people know. Besides, you've earned it. Sarah watched through her usual cameras as James loaded the truck Frank had lent him. Her own memories of market days flooded back, helping her mother arrange produce, learning to make change, watching proud farmers compare their offerings. She'd planned to stay away, but something pulled her toward town. The market sprawled across the town square, white tents gleaming in the morning sun. James set up between the honey seller and a flower vendor, arranging his modest harvest with careful pride. The hand-painted sign read simply, "Montgomery Farm, Heritage Vegetables." "Look at those tomatoes." The first customer arrived before he'd finished setting up. "My grandmother used to get these from old Mr. Montgomery." Soon, a small crowd gathered, drawn by both nostalgia and curiosity. Sarah arrived in her now familiar disguise, watching from the periphery as James explained the vegetables' origins to eager buyers. He spoke about the heritage seeds with reverence, sharing growing techniques learned from the old manuals. Each sale came with a story about the variety's history on the farm. "The beans are almost gone," she said, approaching his booth. James looked up, his face brightening with recognition. "My tomato planting expert. Come to see how your work turned out." Sarah picked up one of the remaining tomatoes, its weight familiar in her hand. How many times had she helped sort these same varieties in the farm's kitchen? "They're exactly as I remember," she said softly, then caught herself. "I mean, as I remember my father describing." James gave her a curious look but was interrupted by more customers. Sarah stepped back, watching him interact with the community. He'd learned their names, their preferences, their connections to the farm's history. Each conversation strengthened the bonds between Montgomery Farm and its neighbors. Betty arrived, with her usual impeccable timing, carrying a basket of still-warm muffins. "Can't have a proper market day without breakfast," she announced. "Your mother's recipe," she added quietly to Sarah with a wink, making her wonder just how good her disguise really was. By noon, the booth was nearly empty. The heritage vegetables had sold out first, with several people placing advance orders. For the next harvest, James sat on a folding chair, looking slightly dazed by the morning's success. "Pretty good for a first market day," Sarah offered, helping him pack up the empty baskets. "It's not just about the sales," he replied, gesturing to the dispersing crowd. Every person who stopped by had a story about this farm, about what it meant to their family. "It's like we're not just growing vegetables, we're growing connections." Sarah thought about the email she'd sent to her board, proposing to transform Montgomery Farm into an agricultural innovation center focused on heritage farming and techniques. The morning's success had proven what she'd already suspected. There was hunger for authenticity, for connection to the land and its history. As she drove back to her mansion, Sarah realized that her two worlds were slowly beginning to merge. The corporate titan and the farmer's daughter were finding common ground, just as James was bridging the gap between the farm's past and its future. Word count: 800 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 11, which will reveal more about James's own wealthy past and the parallels between his life and Sarah's? James found the photograph while cleaning out the barn's loft, tucked inside an old finance magazine. His own younger face stared back at him from the glossy page, confident in an Italian suit, the Manhattan skyline behind him. The caption read, "James Patterson, Wall Street's golden boy takes on Silicon Valley." His hands trembled slightly as he sat back against a hay bale, memories flooding in. That photo had been taken just weeks before everything collapsed, before he'd chosen his client's interests over his own, before his reputation had transformed from golden boy to cautionary tale. The magazine's date caught his eye. It was from the same month Montgomery Tech had launched its IPO. He remembered analyzing the offering, impressed by the company's solid fundamentals and innovative approach. Had someone told him then that He'd end up working their founding family's land. He would have laughed in disbelief. The barn door creaked open below. "James, you up there?" It was Sarah, or rather the woman he knew only as a helpful local who shared his love of farming. She'd been stopping by regularly since the market day, her knowledge of the farm's history proving invaluable. "Just doing some cleaning," he called down, quickly tucking the magazine behind the hay. But as he turned, his old briefcase toppled over, spilling its contents across the floor. Among them, a silver frame containing a photo of his parents in front of their Hampton estate skittered to Sarah's feet. She picked it up, her eyes widening slightly at the obvious signs of wealth in the image. "This doesn't look like a typical farming family," James sighed, realizing the moment for honesty had arrived. "Because it wasn't. I grew up there, but my father grew up on a farm in Kansas. He never let me forget those roots, even after he made his fortune in real estate." Sarah studied the photo more closely. "The market crash of '23, she said softly. "You were the whistleblower who exposed the tech sector manipulation." "You follow financial news?" James asked, surprised. "I read a lot," she replied carefully. "You sacrificed everything to protect your clients." James leaned against a support beam, the weight of his past settling around him like dust motes in the sunlight. "I had evidence that certain tech companies were artificially inflating their values. My firm wanted to bury it. I couldn't let people lose their life savings based on lies." "But you lost everything," Sarah prompted, her voice holding an odd tension. "Not everything." James gestured to the farm around them. "I lost the trappings of wealth, but I found something real. My father used to say that true wealth grows from the ground up. I never understood that until now." Sarah's hand moved to her pocket, where her own family photo lay hidden. The parallels between their lives pulled at her like a physical force. Both children of successful fathers, both shaped by the tension between wealth and authenticity, both finding solace in this land. "The Montgomery family," she said carefully. "They built their tech empire from this farm, didn't they?" James nodded, moving to the loft window. "Started in the old chicken coop, according to Frank, but they never forgot their farming roots. You can see it in everything here, the practical innovation, the attention to detail, the long-term thinking. Actually reminds me of how my father ran his business before I lost my way in the flash and dazzle of Wall Street." Sarah watched him, seeing now the layers of understanding in his restoration work. He wasn't just some homeless man seeking shelter. He was a fallen angel, finding his way back to solid ground, just as she was a hidden heiress, seeking connection to her roots. "Sometimes," she offered, choosing her words carefully, "we have to lose our way to find our true path." James turned to her, sunlight casting his face in thoughtful shadow. "You sound like you know something about that." "Perhaps I do," she replied, her hand still on the hidden photo in her pocket. The moment to reveal her identity pulled at her, but the time wasn't quite right. There were still too many pieces to put in place, too many threads to weave together. Above them, in the security camera's blind spot, dust motes danced in the sunlight, carrying fragments of both their pasts through the quiet air of understanding. Word count: 850 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 12, which will introduce a serious threat to the farm's future and force both characters to confront their changing relationship? The development plans arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier in a crisp suit that seemed out of place among the farm's freshly tilled fields. James found them rolled up and secured with a silver ribbon propped against the farmhouse door. The letterhead read, "Agritech Innovations," above architectural renderings that made his heart sink. In her study, Sarah watched James unroll the plans, her own copy lying open on her desk. The proposal was ambitious, a smart farming research facility, complete with automated greenhouses and data-driven growing systems. The offering price had made even her board members raise their eyebrows. "They want to turn it into a laboratory," James said later that morning, spreading the plans across his workbench for Frank and Betty to see. "Concrete growing beds, climate-controlled environments, artificial everything. But who sent them? Betty asked, though her glance toward the nearest security camera suggested she already knew. Agritech is a subsidiary of Montgomery Tech, Frank explained, his weathered hands tracing the proposed building footprint. They've been buying up farmland all over the state, converting it to research facilities. James stood at the barn door, looking out over the heritage vegetables thriving in the summer sun. The morning light caught the dew on their leaves, creating prisms of natural possibility. "This isn't just about growing food," he said quietly. "It's about growing it right, learning from what worked in the past." In her study, Sarah's fingers hovered over her keyboard. The email from her board was clear: unanimous support for the Agritech proposal. "This represents a perfect synthesis of the Montgomery legacy," the chairman had written, "combining agricultural history with technological innovation." But watching James through her cameras, seeing him move through the fields with such purpose, she remembered her father's words. "Technology should serve the land, Sarah, not replace it." The phone on her desk buzzed. "Ms. Montgomery, the Agritech. A team is here for the preliminary site survey." Sarah watched a fleet of expensive cars pull up to the farm. James met them at the gate, his posture straight but guarded. She activated the audio feed. "Mr. Patterson," the lead developer's tone was carefully neutral. "We understand you've been maintaining the property. We want to assure you that Agritech values traditional agricultural knowledge. In fact, we'd like to offer you a position as a heritage farming consultant." James's laugh held no humor. "You want to pay me to help you destroy everything we've built here?" "We're not destroying anything," the developer countered. "We're evolving it. Imagine combining these heritage strains with modern genetic analysis, optimizing them for today's climate challenges." Sarah watched James gesture to the thriving fields. "These plants are already optimized by generations of farmers who understood the land. Those Montgomery family seeds in our heritage garden, they're producing plants that handle drought better than any engineered variety I've seen." The developer's smile tightened. "The Montgomery family understands progress. Why do you think they transitioned from farming to technology?" "Because they saw technology as a tool to support farming, not replace it," James shot back, and Sarah felt pride surge through her. He understood her family's legacy better than her own board did. In town, word of the proposal spread quickly. By afternoon, a steady stream of visitors arrived at the farm. Local farmers brought records of how the Montgomery family had helped. Their ancestors survived the Dust Bowl. The Historical Society presented documentation of the farm's role in developing sustainable agriculture practices. Even the high school agriculture students arrived with a petition to preserve the farm as a living classroom. Sarah watched it all through her cameras, each show of support strengthening her resolve. She opened a new email, addressing it to her Board of Directors. Agritech proposal. Alternative development strategy. The words flowed easily now, laying out a different vision. Not a rejection of technology, but a more harmonious integration. A center for sustainable agricultural innovation, preserving heritage techniques while developing new tools to support them. And at its heart, the restored Montgomery farm, continuing its legacy of practical innovation. As sunset painted the fields in gold, James stood at the farmhouse window, unaware that he and Sarah were watching the same view. He through time-worn glass, she through digital feeds, both seeing not what the farm was, but what it could become. Both understanding that true progress doesn't erase the past, it builds upon it. Word count, 900 words. Would you like me to continue with chapter 13, which will bring Sarah's identity crisis to a head and force her to finally reveal herself to James? The bank statement wasn't supposed to fall out of her folder. Sarah had brought it to track the anonymous donations she'd been making to local suppliers on the farm's behalf. But as she reached for her work gloves, the paper slipped free, floating like an autumn leaf to land face up at James's feet. His eyes caught the name at the top, Sarah Montgomery. Before she could snatch it away, the number in the balance column contained more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. "You're her," he said quietly, the pieces clicking into place. "The woman who's been watching me through the cameras. The owner I've been—" He trailed off, taking a step back. "James, I can explain." Sarah pulled off her baseball cap, letting her carefully disguised hair fall free. In that moment, she looked more like her corporate photos, the ones that occasionally appeared in tech magazines. All this time, he gestured around the barn, every conversation about the farm's history, about your father's farming techniques. It was actually your life you were talking about. Sarah moved to the workbench, running her hand along its worn surface. "I thought I'd lost this part of myself," she said. "The girl who learned to pull weeds and save seeds. The one who understood that real value grows from the ground up. Why the deception?" James's voice held more hurt than anger. "Why not just tell me who you were?" "Because I needed to know." Sarah turned to face him. "After my father died, everyone wanted something from the Montgomery name. The board wanted to sell this place, turn it into another tech showcase. But then you arrived and you saw what I've always seen, the real heart of Montgomery Tech, right here in this soil." She reached into her pocket and withdrew another paper. The original deed to the farm, her father's notes scribbled in the margins. He wrote here that, "Innovation without roots withers and dies." You understood that without ever meeting him. James took the deed, his financial advisor's eyes scanning the document before shifting to the broader implications. The security cameras, the mysterious deliveries, the support from local businesses. "I wanted to help, but I needed to know you were doing this for the right reasons." Sarah moved to the barn door, looking out over the thriving fields, not for the Montgomery name or money, but for the land itself. "Like you've been doing?" James's tone softened. "Coming here in disguise, getting your hands dirty, reconnecting with your own roots." A small smile touched Sarah's lips. "We're both trying to find our way back to something real, aren't we? You from your Wall Street past, me from my tech empire. Here present." Betty knew, didn't she? James shook his head, remembering the knowing looks, the subtle hints. "Betty used to sneak me cookies when I did my homework in her diner, back when Dad was converting the chicken coop into our first server room." Sarah laughed softly. "She says I never fooled her for a minute with this disguise." The afternoon sun slanted through the barn windows, highlighting the progress they'd made together. Restored equipment, carefully organized tools, the heritage seed vault they'd started. Each item held both past and future, tradition and possibility. "So what happens now?" James asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Does the wealthy owner send the squatter packing?" Sarah walked to the workbench and picked up their shared journal, where they'd been documenting the farm's revival. "Actually, I was hoping to offer you a partnership, not as a consultant or an employee, but as an equal. Someone who understands both the financial and farming sides of building something sustainable." She held out a thick envelope. "These are my plans for the farm's future, not Agritech's sterile labs, but a living laboratory where traditional wisdom meets thoughtful innovation. I'd like you to look them over, not as James Patterson, the former financial advisor, or James, the homeless man seeking shelter, but as the person who brought my family's farm back to life." The evening light caught the silver threads in her uncovered hair, and for the first time, James saw both versions of Sarah at once. The corporate leader and the farmer's daughter, finally finding a way to be whole. Word count: 850 words would. You'd like me to continue with Chapter 14, which will show how James and Sarah begin to forge a new path forward together. The new sign went up at dawn, dew still clinging to the freshly painted letters. Montgomery Heritage Farm, where innovation meets tradition. James and Sarah stood side by side, watching the rising sun illuminate their shared vision. "Your father would have loved this," Frank said, stepping back to admire their work. "He'd arrived early, carrying a box of old photographs showing the farm in its original glory. He always said the Montgomery name meant more than just technology. The morning's agenda lay open on the workbench, their first official planning. Meeting as partners, Sarah had traded her corporate suits and disguises for practical work clothes that felt more authentic than either. James's newfound security showed in his relaxed posture and confident handling of both farming tools and financial projections. "The Heritage Seed program should be our foundation," James said, spreading out their documentation. "We've already proven these varieties have natural resilience with proper research and development. We can bridge the gap between traditional farming wisdom and modern challenges," Sarah finished, pulling up soil analysis data on her tablet. The board's actually excited about the potential. They just needed to see it in terms they understood. The farm had become a hub of activity. University agricultural researchers worked alongside local farmers, documenting traditional techniques while exploring modern applications. The high school's agriculture program had set up a permanent teaching garden, where students learned to blend computer modeling with hands-on farming experience. "Ms. Montgomery," a young intern rushed up, tablet in hand. "The genetic sequencing results from those heritage tomatoes just came in. You won't believe what we found in their drought resistance markers." Sarah smiled at the familiar enthusiasm. "Tell me over lunch. I've got some planting to do first." As the intern hurried off, James caught her eye. "Still feels strange hearing them call you that." "I'm getting used to being whole again," she replied, picking up her work gloves. "No more hiding behind screens or disguises." They walked the fields together, discussing plans for each section. The old chicken coop, birthplace of Montgomery Tech, would become a digital agriculture lab while maintaining its historic character. The barn's hayloft was being converted into a seed bank and research library, preserving both physical seeds and generations of farming knowledge. "We are going to need a bigger market stall," James observed, surveying the expanding crops. "Word's gotten out about our heritage vegetables." "Already handled," Sarah grinned. "Betty's organizing a weekly heritage foods market in town. Local producers using traditional methods supported by our research data." The morning unfolded in a comfortable rhythm of shared work and planning. Their different backgrounds complemented each other perfectly. James's financial expertise balancing Sarah's tech industry connections, their shared love of farming binding it all together. Late morning brought a group of visitors, other farmers interested in participating in their heritage agriculture program. Sarah watched James lead the discussion, his natural teaching ability shining through as he explained their methods. His days of homelessness felt like a distant memory, though both of them knew that experience had helped shape their current success. "The Montgomery family has always believed in the power of practical innovation," Sarah told the group, standing in the field her father had once used to test his first agricultural software. "We're not here to replace traditional farming. We're here to help it thrive in a changing world." As the visitors departed, James and Sarah paused by the heritage garden, where their first crop of Montgomery family tomatoes grew strong and vital. The plants stood as living proof of their philosophy, that the wisdom of the past could help solve the challenges of the future. Word count, 800 words. "Would you like me to continue with chapter 15, which will show how their partnership deepens as they face new challenges and opportunities together?" The shared journal started as a practical tool, a way to track their progress and plans, but as summer deepened into early fall, it became something more. Sarah and James took turns making entries, their handwriting intertwining on pages that documented not just the farm's growth, but their own. "Heritage tomato yields exceeded projections," James had written. Sarah's grandfather was right about the companion planting method. Below it, Sarah's elegant script added, "just like Dad," was right about integrating old wisdom with new techniques. "The soil sensor data confirms what the plants are showing us." They sat together on the farmhouse porch, morning coffee in hand, reviewing the latest university research results. The heritage vegetables had shown remarkable resilience to climate stresses, attracting attention from agricultural scientists worldwide. Berkeley wants to send another research team, Sarah said, scrolling through her emails. And the EU Sustainable Farming Commission is interested in our seed preservation. Methods, James nodded, but his attention was on a group of local farmers touring their experimental fields. The real victory is right there, he said. People actually using what we're learning. The farm had become a living laboratory of collaboration. Traditional farmers worked alongside tech developers, each learning from the other. In the restored barn, an artificial intelligence system catalogued generations of agricultural wisdom, while in the fields, time-tested farming methods proved their worth through careful documentation. "Remember when you first found me here?" James asked, his voice thoughtful. "Did you ever imagine it would turn into this?" Sarah set down her tablet, choosing her words carefully. "I imagined possibilities, but this," she gestured to the thriving farm around them, "this is better than anything I could have planned." Their partnership had evolved naturally, each bringing their strengths to their shared vision. James's financial background helped them structure sustainable growth, while Sarah's tech industry connections opened doors for innovative research. But it was their shared love of the land that kept them grounded. Betty arrived with her usual impeccable timing, carrying fresh muffins and local gossip. "You two are becoming quite the talk of the agricultural world," she said, setting down her basket. "Though some of us are more interested in other developments." She gave them a meaningful look that made both shift slightly in their chairs. The changing nature of their relationship hadn't gone unnoticed by the community. Their early morning planning sessions often stretched into evening discussions. Shared meals had become routine. The line between professional partnership and something more personal was gradually blurring. "The heritage garden needs attention," Sarah said quickly, rising from her chair. But she paused to squeeze James's shoulder as she passed, a gesture as natural as the morning dew. They worked together through the morning, falling into the comfortable rhythm they'd developed. Sarah's corporate efficiency complemented James's careful farming techniques. They moved through the tasks like dancers who had learned to anticipate each other's steps. "The Montgomery family would be proud," Frank observed, stopping by with some old farming equipment he'd restored. "Seeing the old and new working together like this." "We're all family here now," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. The farm had created connections stronger than blood or business, bonds forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in harvest colors, they added a new entry to their journal. James wrote about the day's crop developments, while Sarah sketched plans for expanding their educational programs. Between their notes, they pasted photographs of their progress: the heritage garden in full bloom, local farmers learning new techniques, students coding agricultural apps in the converted chicken coop. "We should document the old stories too," Sarah suggested, thinking of her father's early days. "The real history of Montgomery Farm, from the beginning until now." James looked at her, understanding in his eyes. "Our story's part of that history now, isn't it?" They sat together in the growing dusk, planning their future while honoring their past. The farm around them stood as testament to what could grow. From unlikely beginnings, heritage seeds, innovative ideas, and hearts finding common ground. Word count, 850 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 16, which will focus on their first major harvest together and its impact on both the community and their relationship? The golden wheat field rippled in the early morning breeze, each stalk heavy with promise. Sarah stood at its edge, her father's old scythe in her hands, watching the sun paint the scene in shades of amber and possibility. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered for Montgomery Heritage Farm's first major harvest. "Traditional first cutting," Frank explained to the assembled researchers and local farmers. "Been done this way here for generations." He nodded to Sarah, who stepped forward. the scythe's movement coming back to her like muscle memory. James watched her begin the harvest with the same grace she brought to everything now, no longer hiding behind corporate masks or careful disguises. The morning light caught the silver in her hair, matched by the flash of the scythe as it swept through the wheat. After the first ceremonial cutting, modern equipment moved in, but with a thoughtful approach that honored the land. University. Researchers documented everything. Their tablets recording the perfect blend of traditional wisdom and technological efficiency that had become the farm's hallmark. The heritage wheat varieties are showing exceptional protein content, Dr. Chen from the Agricultural Department reported, studying her readings. And the natural pest resistance is remarkable. Whatever your ancestors did to develop these strains, Miss Montgomery, they were generations ahead of their time. They paid attention, James answered for her, sharing a knowing look with Sarah. Really paid attention to what the land was telling them. The harvest proceeded through the morning, becoming more celebration than work. Local families arrived. With food and drinks, children ran between the hay bales, and the air filled with the kind of community spirit that had become increasingly rare in the modern world. Sarah found James by the old oak tree where they'd set up their impromptu headquarters. He was reviewing yield calculations, but his eyes held a distant look. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, offering him water from her canteen. "Just remembering." "The day I arrived here," he replied, accepting the drink. "Homeless, hopeless, thinking I'd lost everything that mattered. And now? Now I know I had it backwards. I hadn't lost everything. I just hadn't found what really mattered yet." Their eyes met, the moment heavy with unspoken feelings. Around them, the farm hummed with life and purpose. The converted chicken coop's solar panels gleamed in the sun, powering the computers that track their innovations. In the heritage garden, students documented traditional growing techniques with modern technology. Every corner of the farm showed what could grow when past and future worked together. Betty appeared with her perfect timing, carrying a familiar basket. "Thought you might want this," she said, pulling out a carefully preserved photograph. It showed Sarah's father at their first harvest, standing proud in the same wheat field. "He'd be so proud," Betty continued, watching Sarah trace the image with gentle fingers. "Not just of the farm, mind you, but of what you two have built here together." The afternoon brought more visitors, agricultural ministers from 3 countries, tech industry leaders curious about their innovations, and small farmers eager to learn their methods. James and Sarah led the tours together, their words overlapping with practiced ease as they explained their vision. "It's not about replacing traditional farming," Sarah explained to the group. "It's about giving it the respect and support it deserves, while using technology to help us learn from generations of wisdom," James added, calling up soil analysis data on his tablet. "Every traditional technique we document helps us understand sustainable agriculture better." As evening approached, the community gathered for a harvest celebration in the restored barn. Tables groaned with local food, much of it grown from their heritage seeds. Children played between hay bales, their laughter mixing with adult conversations about crop yields and future plans. Sarah found herself back at the wheat field's edge, watching the sunset paint the stubbled ground in shades of promise. James joined her, their shoulders touching comfortably. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing me how to be whole again, how to bridge all the parts of myself I thought had to stay separate." He turned to her, his expression open and genuine. "Thank you for seeing something worth saving in a man who thought he'd lost his way." The dying sun caught the wheat dust in the air, turning it to floating gold around them. In that moment, with the sounds of celebration drifting from the barn, they were simply 2 people who had found their true home, in this land and in each other. Word count, 900 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 17, which will show how they begin to shape their future together while honoring the farm's past? The renovated farmhouse stood proudly in the autumn sunshine, its fresh white paint and restored details a testament to the changes the past year had brought. Sarah stood in what had once been her childhood bedroom, now transformed into a modern home office where she could manage both the farm and her tech empire. "The contractors finished the last touches downstairs," James said, joining her at the window, "though Frank insists he needs to inspect their work personally." The view before them showcased everything they'd accomplished. The heritage gardens flourished with fall crops. The new greenhouse complex merged seamlessly with the traditional barn, and the research center in the converted chicken coop hummed with activity. Students and scientists moved between buildings, their shared purpose evident in their enthusiasm. "Hard to believe this all started with a homeless man and some hidden cameras," Sarah mused, leaning back against him. The easy intimacy of the gesture spoke volumes about how their relationship had evolved. "And a billionaire in disguise," James added, wrapping his arms around her. "We were quite a pair, weren't we?" Their laughter was interrupted by Betty's arrival, her familiar basket now accompanied by a stack of papers. "The legal team finished the partnership agreements," she announced, her role as unofficial farm manager now formalized. "Though I don't know why you two need papers to confirm what everyone's known for months." The documents would make James an equal partner in both the farm and its associated research initiatives. More importantly, they would ensure the land could never be sold or developed, protecting their vision for generations to come. "My father always said true partnerships grow naturally," Sarah said, leading them downstairs to the restored dining room. The room's antique table, once the site of Montgomery family decisions, was now covered with their plans for the farm's future. Speaking of growing things, James pulled out a small box he'd discovered in the barn that morning. Inside, carefully preserved, lay seed packets dated from the farm's earliest days. "Found these behind a loose board, your great-grandfather's original stock." Sarah handled the packets with reverence. "These could be the ancestors of our current heritage varieties. The genetics team will be thrilled." "Already called them," Betty interjected. "They're sending someone over this afternoon. Though if you two want to make that partnership announcement at tonight's community dinner, we should focus on the preparations." The evening's event would officially unveil both their personal and professional commitment to the farm's future. The renovated farmhouse would be their home, the center of a living laboratory where traditional farming wisdom and modern innovation worked in harmony. As sunset approached, the farm came alive with celebration. Local families who had supported them from the beginning mingled with university researchers and agricultural experts from around the world. The heritage garden provided much of the feast, proving that their methods could produce both abundant and delicious results. Frank stood to make a toast, his weathered face bright with emotion. "To the Montgomery family legacy, not just a name, but what it stands for. And to James and Sarah, who showed us that the best growth comes from nurturing our roots while reaching for the future." Later, after the guests had gone and evening settled over the farm, James and Sarah walked their fields together. The same path that had once seen them as stranger and observer, then friends and partners, now felt them as two people who had found their way home. "You know," Sarah said, stopping by the wheat field, where their story had turned its most important. "In corner, we never did thank those security cameras that started all this." James laughed, pulling her close. "I think we've moved well beyond surveillance now." The farmhouse lights glowed warmly behind them, while before them stretched the fields they'd restored together. Each acre held their shared vision, a place where innovation served tradition, where growth respected roots, and where two people from different worlds had found common ground. Word count: 900 words. Would you like me to continue with chapter 18, the final chapter, which will bring all the story's threads together and look toward the future? The new seed catalogue lay open on the farmhouse kitchen table, its pages filled with photographs and descriptions of their heritage varieties. Each entry told a story, not just of plant characteristics and growing conditions, but of the generations of wisdom behind each carefully preserved strain. Montgomery Heritage Seeds, Sarah read from the cover, tracing the embossed letters, bringing yesterday's wisdom to tomorrow's gardens. James set down 2 coffee mugs and settled beside her. The first orders are already coming in. Farmers from 5 continents want to try our varieties. Through the kitchen window, they could see students gathering for the morning's activities. The farm had become an internationally recognized center for sustainable agriculture, drawing people from around the world to learn their unique blend of traditional wisdom and modern innovation. The university called again, Sarah said, sipping her coffee. They want to expand the research program, more students, more projects. As long as we keep the balance, James replied. Theory and practice, technology and tradition. Their shared journal sat nearby, its pages now filled with both agricultural records and personal milestones. The latest entry detailed plans for their upcoming wedding, a celebration that would blend Sarah's tech world connections with the farming community that had become their extended family. Betty burst in with her usual energy, now carrying a tablet along with her signature basket. The Morning News wants to do another feature on the farm, something about the future of traditional agriculture. Also, those heritage tomato seeds you sent to the drought-stricken regions are showing amazing results. The success of their project had far exceeded their initial hopes. What had started as one man's attempt to restore an abandoned farm, watched by a woman searching for her roots, had grown into a movement. Their methods were being adopted by farming communities worldwide, proving that progress didn't have to mean abandoning wisdom. Frank arrived next, leading a group of international agricultural ministers on an early tour. "Ladies and gentlemen," they heard him announce proudly, "welcome to the future of farming, built on the best of the past." Sarah squeezed James's hand under the table. "Did you ever imagine, that first morning when you pushed open the gate, that it would lead to this?" "I was just looking for a place to rebuild my life," he answered honestly. "Instead, I found a way to help rebuild something much bigger." The day unfolded around them with practiced rhythm. Research teams collected data while local farmers shared generations of knowledge. Students developed apps to track traditional growing methods, while elderly community members taught them about reading weather signs and soil conditions. In the Heritage Garden, their original test plot had become a living museum of agricultural history. The descendants of those first seeds now helped feed communities around the world, proving that old wisdom could solve modern challenges. As evening approached, they walked together through the wheat field, where they'd first acknowledged their feelings for each other. The setting sun painted everything in shades of possibility. "You know what my father would love most about all this?" Sarah asked, gesturing to their thriving farm. "Not the international recognition or the research breakthroughs. He'd love that we're still basically farmers, working the land and learning its lessons." James nodded, understanding completely. "And my father would love that we've found a way to make tradition profitable without sacrificing its soul." They reached the old oak tree where James had once slept during his first nights on the farm. Now it shaded a gathering spot where farmers and scientists shared ideas, where past and future met in productive dialogue. "Ready for tomorrow?" James asked, knowing their schedule was packed with tours, research presentations, and wedding preparations. Sarah smiled, thinking of all the tomorrows stretching before them. "As long as we remember what got us here, taking chances, trusting in possibility, and believing that good things can grow from unexpected beginnings." The farm settled around them as night fell, security cameras still quietly watching, now just one small part of a much bigger story. In the distance, the renovated farmhouse glowed with warmth and welcome, a beacon of what could happen when hope found fertile ground.